Talking of which, what we're going to do now is talk about populations as a whole. All of us in this room know the absolute desire for transition. We know how much this is talked about in the news. We know how many times, how many column inches, how many minutes, how many hours on television this whole issue gets, what the debate is like. We know that that is being talked about. So how do you harness that power? How do you get public opinion with you, the public opinion that has the desire? How do you harness that desire and take it forward in the best way possible with all the different players, all the different actors on board? Well, that's what we are going to talk about now, and I'm delighted to say that we are going to bring on stage now the CEO of Smart Infrastructure and also a member of the managing board at Siemens. Please welcome on stage Cedrik Neike. Cedrik, thank you.
All right, I asked that question to my management team, and I asked it to all of the Asian energy executives. And the simple reason was that the hottest 4 years are in the last 5 years which we had. And not only that, actually the hottest 20 years were in the last 22 years. So something is happening. And my question was, I mean, all of you are actually responsible for something. Can you show me the following thing? And I need to, so tell me if we're doing too much, you're putting your hand here. If you're saying we're doing just enough, put your hand here. And if you're thinking we're not doing enough, put your hand up. If you could just do this, and it's the only thing I'm going to ask for you today, perfect. All right. So I get exactly the same. Actually, Francesco, you're thinking, no, that's we're doing enough, so that's okay. But it's a good part. The main thing is that we are thinking of this all the time, are thinking we're not doing enough. And I want to share with you what are we doing at Siemens, or what are we doing in general to be able to address some of those issues. Now, the main idea is if we don't do nothing, and we know this, the temperature will rise and we will have issues. The thing which I'm trying to convey also, and when we were together in Singapore, was the following is, look, most of the climate change will be decided in big urban areas, right? In urban areas. And I just came back from China. If you think about it, we're here in Paris. I've been to Shenzhen. I don't know if any of you have been to Shenzhen. It used to be a little fisher village just 30 years ago. It's now 12 million people. We have now an urban population in China of 1 billion people alone, right? There will be more than 200 cities, more than 1 million people, which will be existing in China. And if you look at the Beijing-Hebei area, it's going to be more than 130 million people living there. So we need to see, okay, why is that an issue? Why is it a problem? Because the population, and if we look at Paris, if we look at Europe, we're privileged. We have relatively small cities. But even if we have small cities, we waste a lot of resources. So I'm going to give you another example. I used to live in New York. I think, Francesco, you used to live in New York also. You just came back from New York when we talked last time. Is that actually, do you know how much resources a New Yorker compared to somebody in Jakarta uses? 20 times more. A New Yorker, and I used to be in New York, and uses 20 times more resources than somebody in Jakarta. That means if urbanization goes to 200 cities with more than 1 million people, we have to do something, especially also in Europe, in which we look at how can we actually be more sort of thoughtful about with the resources we actually have. What are the main things we do? So my point, and I basically give that sort of view, and I normally did a little game. I said, so who has a bottle of water in this room? So if you raise a bottle of water in this room, New York consumes 5 billion liters of water every day. And if you put little bottles of water one over the next, that would mean that in New York you would reach the moon every day with resources which you're using. So we have to think differently. And my whole speech, and this is sort of an entry speech, is should we be concerned of what's going on? I mean, we're all agreeing, yes. Should we have fear? Perhaps. Should we be panicked? No. That's the main message and the positive message of what I'm going to try to convey and talk to you about. Why? I'll go quickly through it. The first thing and the good news is, and that was the great presentation we just heard, we already started. So I have 4 kids, and my kids ask me, Dad, you're working for Siemens, are you doing enough to actually give me a world which is better than the world you inherited? And I said, well, look around, there are certain things which are happening already. We talked about wind turbines, we talk about solar energy, but when we talk to our kids, when they think about renewables, they think of e-cars. And if we look at e-cars at the moment, we basically are using quite a bit of e-cars all around. The problem, however, we have is that the amount of renewables, the share of the amount of renewables is actually pretty low still. Germany's shares of renewable is at the moment 38% of the total energy mix. It's going to go by 2030 to 45%. So that sounds okay, but I'm going to share with you that because it's only electricity, it is not the complete sort of energy mix which we have in total. So the key thing is we need to actually look at how can we move more and more sectors to be electrified. And this is just an example. Today we only have 6 million e-cars at the moment. And we have only, 30 million, we have 600,000 charging outlets, of which 40,000 actually Shell is going to provide to us. So we're doing little things. We're putting solar up, we're putting wind up, we're trying to go into the e-mobility space. So there are things which are happening at the moment which are going in the right direction. We even think about how can we actually accelerate this. The problem is if you look at e-cars, as soon as you put more than 5 sort of high-speed chargers or AC chargers in, you have to dig up the roads. So we need to be more creative and think, can we work with startups? And Nortje is going to talk about this. This is a startup, we in Siemens work about it. So you can actually charge your car in a pole. So my first message is, something is happening, we're doing the first step, and it's going in the right direction. My second message is, well, you need to actually have a strategy. And we just heard about the strategy. The strategy is we need to decarbonize. That's our first D. We need to decentralize the energy systems because the energy systems are really sort of changing pretty dramatically, and we need to actually digitalize it. My example, we talked about 500,000 sort of power producers which we have in France at the moment. In Germany, I'm half French, half German, in 1990 we had 1,000 power plants. 1,000 power plants. And we had 4 mathematicians which were calculating when France was playing Germany in the finals and when a lot of energy was needed. Now the reality is today we have more than 2 million power producers. And when you have 2 million power producers, the electric grids have not been designed to be able to take all of those energy influx and output in there. So we need to say, how can we actually do this? How can we build an infrastructure which is capable of doing this? And the view we have is that we're saying we need to include the buildings. We need to include the power, the prosumers, the producers and consumers into this energy mix. So the idea is how can you combine grids and how can you combine buildings? 38% of worldwide energy is being used in buildings. Nearly half of this is being wasted. We have to make these elements more and more intelligent to be able to be combined. And I'll give you an example. I'm actually going to Dubai after this day today. In Dubai, we're building the Expo. It's supposed to be the biggest and greenest Expo ever done. And if you look at it, would you build an Expo in the middle of a desert and make it the greenest ever? You wouldn't. So the only way you actually can do it is if you're saying, I'm going to sort of digitalize this infrastructure and then make it as green as possible. So we're putting in hydrogen, we're combining access control, we're combining energy consumption, cooling, we're combining water consumption, all through the same systems to be able to optimize these capabilities. And this is just an example of what we're showing you. So the idea is the following is, A, we've started to do something. B, we have to actually look at a strategy of really sort of decarbonizing, decentralizing, and digitalizing to be able to do this. The third one, and this is what Francesco was talking about it early on, we have to think much bigger. We have to tear the silos down. What is meant by this? And a similar slide was shown. This is the European total energy consumption. Total energy consumption. Only a third, or actually 22% is power, is electrified. and only a third of this is actually renewables. So even if we increase dramatically the amount of renewables, we talked about 100 gig which we're adding to the network, it's not enough. We need to actually go into heating and cooling to be able to electrify it first. So in order to have an impact, we need to electrify mobility, we need to electrify heating and cooling, and then we need to put more renewables in the mix. That's the fundamental assumptions which we need to do. The idea of sector coupling is the only way we're going to have an impact on what we promised for the Paris Accords. And this is the example, is if you look at the same presentation I have, is the share of the electricity production of renewable is 38%, for example, in Germany, but it's only 17% of total energy consumption. So my wish today is not only to put as much possibility of putting as much electricity consumption into renewables, but to make more and more things actually electrified. So how do we do it? What's the call for action? So I'm going to give you 3 examples of what we did and just give you sort of that example. The first one is you have to start with yourself. So we in Siemens, just to give you an overview, committed to be completely carbon neutral. We have 380,000 employees. We're in 200 countries around the world. We will be carbon neutral by 2030. How do we do this? We actually buy a lot of renewables for our infrastructure. We put decentralized energy system on all of our manufacturing plants. And we basically electrify also our fleet of cars, 48,000 cars which are being electrified. So we start with ourselves and say, what can we as a company do before we tell anyone what they should do, what we can do ourselves. And we're putting 100 million euros to be able to actually achieve that. So that's the first one, is we want to actually be carbon neutral by 2030. Then there's the next thing. What technology do we have which we could offer you to have an impact? And we calculated that 609 million metric tons of CO2 is being reduced by technology Siemens produces. Wind turbines, more efficient gas turbines, more efficient distribution grids, reduction of electricity in buildings, which are in our portfolio, which we can make available for you to be able to have that reduction in the infrastructure, in the carbon tons. And I'll give you a couple of examples. This is Finland. Let me go to Finland. In Finland, this is the biggest shopping center in Finland. It's called Sello. The biggest shopping center in Finland says, look, I need to attract, in this age of digitalization, I need to attract people to come here, so I want to be carbon neutral. So we worked with them to not only put solar, and there's a lot of sun in summer in Finland, not in winter, but a lot in summer. How do we put solar in, and how do we put batteries in to be able to store it? So we reduced with LEDs, etc. We made it a LED building, LED platinum building, but we also put a battery storage in, which we connected to the Finnish grid. So excess capacity of this shopping center, which is renewables, can be sold back to the Finnish grid. And the Finnish grid can use this battery to actually store, or to basically stabilize to 50 hertz the grid environment. So what I was talking about is we are using technology not only to reduce energy consumption, to trade energy, and also to stabilize the grid which is there. We're building basically a virtual power plant. That's one example. The second example we have is actually the metro line in Paris. So if you go to Paris, we're automating at the moment the metro line in Paris by having it driverless. And the idea is not to save people which are actually in the metro, but to reduce, to increase actually the amount of trains you can put through the same metro line. We can increase by 20% the amount of people which actually can take sort of public transportation. That reduces, has a huge impact on the utilization of basically the public transport environment. So we can make assets more intelligent by putting automatization and capabilities in there. And my joke was, we've been doing metro lines for quite a while here in France. This is the first one in the Exposition Internationale d'Électricité. But the key idea is we have technology which we can continuously put and bring in the same direction forward. The other one is of course, we're putting a lot of wind energy in. This is a 1 gig park which we're building together in France in an offshore environment. And I don't know if you know, but basically the new generation of wind turbines will actually be the size of the Tour Eiffel. I mean, they're huge, the 10 megawatt ones. So if you go out there, the first thing I did when I joined Siemens is to actually go to an offshore field and just see the size of what humankind is actually building. So the three projects I was sharing with you are three different types. One is energy saving, making basically buildings an active part of the energy grid. The second example was actually taking our infrastructure and making it smarter by automating it. The third one is to put more renewables in so that we have those capabilities. The problem we have, the main problem is how do you store excess energy? It's not always, you don't always have wind, you don't always have sun. Germany wastes more than €1 billion, and it's going to go to 2 billion euros of wind energy which is being produced in the north, which cannot be consumed in the south. We switched off our atomic reactors. We are now going to basically having lignite to do a lot of the electricity production, and we cannot store or transport most of the energy we produce. So the idea is we need to think on how to store energy. So Siemens has created a joint venture with the #1 providers of utility-based battery storage to be able to store it. But batteries only can do one thing. The one element which we're actually working with the Canadian government is to store energy in heat. So France is a great example. Every place in France, basically the heat which you wouldn't be able to store in any way, shape or form. So in Canada, the idea is we will not build new power plants because we will store the energy in heat, really coupling the sectors. These are examples on, as I said, technology which we have to work with you to be able to actually make them real and actually bring them forward. And my last part is the following one. Start with yourself, save and apply as much technology as you can. Share the technology and work with others to be able to say, look, this is technology we have and we want to make available to you. But the third one is that we will have to work together. There's not a single company in this room which will be able to solve those elements. The next presentation will be work with startups together, and I'll give you an example. We created, for example, this ecosystem in Berlin. We invited around energy not only Siemens, small and medium companies, but also startups to work together. We will invest together with the City of Berlin more than 2 billion euros to build such an ecosystem to solve those problems jointly. So I went back, I started with a video and asking you, are we doing enough? Are we doing enough to be able to do this? I gave you a view, it might look like we're doing enough, but it doesn't feel like it with the temperature still rising. We have a strategy, we know where we're going, we know that we have to do sector coupling. I wanted to share with you what Siemens does. We start with our own technology applied to ourselves. In the US, you call it eat your own dog food. In France, you will call it drink your own champagne, right? Use your own technology. Second one, make sure that the technology you have is being used by others. Second point. Third part, why are we here today? We have to work together. And I have this picture, it's actually not my daughter, but as I said, I have 4 kids. My daughter goes every Friday for the Friday for Future. And she looks at me and says, wow, you're one of these big shots executive. I don't know if you're doing enough. I think you're not doing enough. It doesn't feel like you're doing enough. So my little part was not to only present to you Siemens technology and how great we are. My key sort of appeal to all of you is whatever we think we're doing, it's not enough. And we have to do more. And we have to push and we have to think. Because if we, Siemens being a technology company, if you as utilities, as startups, as different sort of also legislator, are not putting everything we need to, we will not actually get to our promise and give a world back to our kids, which is better than the world which we inherited. So that's the key sort of 20 minutes I wanted to share with you and what we're doing about this. And I wanted to thank you for listening to me. And I had 3 mics, so I hope you could actually hear me all around the place. All right, thanks.
Cedrik, thank you very much. Really interesting, really fascinating presentation. I just wonder, because you're showing so many pictures of like new technology, the new shopping centres, the new way of doing things. How much of a challenge is it to retrofit to bring in that technology that you're talking about when, you know, we're in an environment in Paris, where I come from, in London, where we have aging buildings, we have historical buildings as well.
So the good news is you can make bigger savings by retrofitting than actually new buildings, because you go from the start, there's so much sort of energy you can save. I give you an example. The Cello shopping center was retrofitted to be the greenest shopping center in Europe, and we actually put financing to it. So we basically said the shopping center didn't spend $1. We said we will finance the whole project by reducing your energy cost, and we will take a cut of it. We had to work with the legislator to be able to allow to trade the energy, so that was sort of the capability we have. But the same, I showed you Siemensstadt. It's actually a part of Siemens, or a part of the town of Berlin is called Siemens Town. It's 100 years old. And we want to prove that we can build a completely green campus on an area which is more than 100 years old. So back to your question, a lot can be done for brownfield. It's more difficult, but that's where you need to have a bit sort of ideas and technology of what you want to do. But there's quite a few things you can actually achieve.
You need to be very agile. Now, you said you wanted everyone to work together. Are you and your team here and happy to maybe people
That's
come?
why we're here, absolutely.
Fantastic.
So whenever you see somebody from Siemens, grab them and say, Cedrik promised me that you're going to help me. So let's see if it works.
You heard it here. Cedrik, thank you very much. Thank you.